Welcome to How We Work Now, where we explore how people are reshaping the modern workplace through lived experience with neurodiversity, chronic illness, and disability. Today I'm joined by Emma Vogelmann, co-CEO at Transport for All. Emma is a powerful advocate for accessible transport and disability rights and the creator behind The Wheelchair Activist. Emma's work bridges activism, policy reform, and storytelling, grounded in her lived experience as a disabled woman with spinal muscular atrophy. Welcome, Emma. I'm so glad to have you here with us today. Do you care to introduce yourself to everyone in your own words?
Absolutely, yeah, and thank you so much for having me. So yeah, as you said, I'm Emma. I'm fairly new to the co-CEO role at Transport for All. Transport for All is a disabled persons organization based in the UK. And we are pan-modal, so that means we cover all modes of transport and we also cover all disabilities. So we try to represent the needs of all disabled people on transport, whether that's a taxi or a train or a bus. And yeah, like any self-respecting millennial, during COVID, or not long after COVID, decided to start a podcast that's called The Wheelchair Activist, which I am, yeah, incredibly proud of. It's a interview style podcast where I get to have conversations with some incredible disabled people who are all doing such different types of work, because for me, I got into this project purely because I believe so much in the power of representation. And I think for disabled people, it's so difficult for us to be able to see ourselves doing a particular job or in a particular career field because we don't see anyone who represents us in that workforce. And that can really limit the goals that we set for ourselves, because it's incredibly daunting being the first person to do something or thinking that you're the first person to do something. And it's really where the podcast was born, is that I met so many incredible disabled people through my work who were doing different things. And I thought, this is the representation that people need to know about. And so, yeah, we are a few seasons in now, and I'm so incredibly proud of it.
That's so amazing. I agree too a lot on the need for visibility of other disabled people and the work they do and kind of what's possible for different people because I think a lot of the overarching story is that disabled people, we're not supposed to be going into different fields or it's not possible for us. And while there are a lot of very real physical and systemic barriers, I think that it's also important to talk about the things that we can achieve and can do and what's possible for people living with chronic illness, disability, and neurodivergence. So, let's get into our first question. Can you tell me a little bit about your background and what led you into disability rights and policy work?
Yeah, that is a great question. And I say that because the short answer is by accident. So growing up, I've always lived with a disability, so I've been a full-time electric wheelchair user my whole life, and have been on a ventilator through a tracheostomy since I was 15, but I didn't consider myself to be disabled for a very long time. I was in my sort of early or mid 20s when I faced a barrier, and it completely prevented me from doing something that I needed to do. It was actually, I was at university and there were some very old lifts on campus, or elevators. And what happened was that, at the beginning and the end of every hour, students would like pile into these teeny tiny lifts and, go up and down 14 times, and it would cause overuse. It would cause, there were too many people in it. So, the lifts just couldn't cope. And over time, they broke down. And every time that they broke down, we there might be a short-term fix. But ultimately, it was the actions of other students who didn't need to use the lift or the elevator that led to me not being able to get to my classes. So I did law at university. I did that in the UK, and I studied in London, and I honestly did not plan to go into disability at all. Like I said, I didn't even identify as disabled, so I really wanted to go into the human rights sector and very much didn't identify myself in that movement at all, which looking back on it is really quite amazing that I didn't see that disability rights fits completely within human rights. But I was imagining myself working on issues that had nothing to do with me personally, and I wanted to be a barrister. So those are the lawyers in the UK who stand up in court and, argue arguments, cases, and all of that. Um, so that was what I planned on going into, but I was told when I was a law student and I was doing some work experience or shadowing for a week with a barrister who did not have a disability that I knew of anyways. Nor did they tell me about any family or personal connection to disability, but they told me that I wasn't going to be able to be a lawyer and I wasn't going to be able to be the type of lawyer that I wanted to be because of this culture that they had experienced of that you need to be the first person in the office in the morning and you need to be the last person to leave in the evening, and that is the only way that you can show your dedication to what you're doing and to your career. And I knew that my physical disability just would not sustain that. There was no way that I was going to be able to commit to that physically because I would get too fatigued too quickly, and I just knew that it wasn't going to work. So I let that one person completely change the trajectory of my career. I started then looking into the charity sector again, still with the human rights focus, and realize I could use my law degree and the skills that, studying law taught me into the charity sector and I could apply it there. But it was only when I faced that barrier of the lift that I mentioned that the disability stuff started because I was so incredibly angry at how I was being treated and how I wasn't getting equal access to my education that I was paying for, same as everyone else who was there. And no one did anything about it. The administration didn't really care, students didn't care. And that's when I realized that I wasn't just going to be fighting this for me, but I was doing it on behalf of that I didn't want future disabled students to come to that university and face that barrier and not be able to get their education. So I started writing in terms of policy and like political goings on, initially for the Huffington Post about, my experiences, and my career in disability took off from there. I started to self-identify as disabled and started to connect with the amazing community that the disabled community is. And then here we are about a decade later, and I have only worked in disability organizations. And yeah, I've never really looked back since then.
That's quite a lot of uh, journeys you've had to go through as you navigated your young adult life into where you are now. And I know I've had experiences at my own college where I ended up dropping out because I couldn't get the accommodations I needed to continue my schooling. And I wasn't relying on a wheelchair or anything at that time either. So it's I think colleges get a reputation for being very liberal and caring a lot, but
Mm,
in reality, they often don't actually live up to that for disabled students having to attend college and asking for accommodations they need. So,
yeah, I would
um,
definitely agree with that.
looking back, what personal values or moments have most defined your journey towards leadership working for Transport for All?
Yeah, so in Transport for All, it was actually my first time in my career working for a disabled person's organization as opposed to an organization that advocated for disabled people. So a disabled person's organization in the UK is typically defined by having a certain percentage of your staff body and your trustee board having lived experience of disability, usually, being disabled themselves. And I joined Transport for All coming up on just about 3 years ago. And I started there as a policy and public affairs manager, because that's, policy, public affairs has been like where my career has ended up in the charity sector, specifically on disability, but doing a whole bunch of stuff around disability. But in Transport for All, I had this incredible CEO, Caroline Stickland, who just really showed me for the first time, and that comes back to like our point around representation, right? Like the previous places I'd worked, there the CEOs had been non-disabled people. I have, had the benefit of working under a female CEO before and found that to be quite a different experience to working under a male CEO. I definitely had more growth and like learning opportunities under her name is Kat Woodhead, who is the CEO of an organization called Living Streets. And I knew really early on in my career in the charity sector that I wanted to progress, like I wanted to grow, I wanted to get more experience and responsibility. And so working with Caroline at Transport for All, I saw another disabled woman doing the job. And to me, it was that amazing moment of seeing someone who represented me doing a job that I wanted to do. So you see it being possible really for one of the first few times, and the first time really up close. And I learned so much from her in terms of how you can advocate for your community and still, have this incredibly important role, chief executive, and really like not compromise on values, not compromise on integrity, and not make yourself smaller in any type of way. I saw Caroline sort of go head to head with, officials from the Department for Transport who were saying things that you knew were potentially completely wrong. And, instead of just sort of smiling and nodding and thinking, oh, this will be ridiculous later, funny story that I can tell later. I saw Caroline really like speak truth to power and do that in a such an impactful way that she commanded respect for not just her, but for disabled women, for disabled people in general, and just really not compromise, but still being respectful, still being appropriate, still being professional. And I think seeing that, I actually remember I got her a card at one point because I was just like, I'm learning so much from you, and like I don't think you realize how much you just like watching you in meetings. It's had a profound impact on how I, see myself and how I now as a leader behave. And I'm sort of now in the role of showing people on my team and in the rest of my organization that, you can be a leader and you can still hold really important values and be uncompromising in those values and do it in a successful way.
That sounds like such an, amazing experience to have that leadership example to look up to, and sounds almost like mentorship from Carolyn to show you what, leadership could look like in the disabled sphere. Is standing up for your rights and the rights of other people as well. Um,
Take your time.
so, thank you. Um, in what other ways does transport for all approach flexibility and accessibility internally? What systems do you have in place that reflect the advocacy that you do externally for the disabled people that work within Transport for All?
That's so incredibly important to us as an organization because so one of our values is literally that we are unapologetically disabled. And while I've been at the organization, we had a bit of a refresh of our values and we felt like that was it. That's what we wanted to be, and that's what we want to be in terms of advocacy. So in the work that we do, it's, not apologizing for that you need assistance, or not apologizing for the fact that, you're making a complaint because a lift is out of order, or, making a complaint about a bus driver not stopping for you because they noticed you have a white cane. All of these instances where disabled people, like through society, are made to feel like they're the problem, they're the burden. We very much approach our external work with that. We're not going to apologize. We are a huge percentage of the population. We have these needs, and if you meet these needs, there are benefits for so many more people than just us. But in terms of internally, it's really important to us that we maintain those values internally. So we, for as much as possible, have flexible working. So first of all, we are all remote. So we actually don't have a physical office space, which that has its pros and cons. But one of the big pros is that when we're recruiting people, we're not looking at a smaller talent pool, right? Because if we are all remote, and obviously if remote working is suitable for, candidates or people looking for roles, they can apply to us whether they're based in Wales or Scotland or England, wherever it is within the UK, and we can make sure that we're getting the best people for that role. So I think that's really great. And we offer flexible working. So, if you're a disabled person who, like me, for example, if personal care takes a really long amount of time, then, to get up and get ready in the morning, then you can be flexible with your hours. You can start later, and that's not a problem. Everyone just naturally thinks different times of day when they work best, or, where they work within their space, whether that's in bed. We definitely have people who have taken, meetings from bed because they're having a flare up, and, not apologizing for anything in that regard. So that's one sort of big thing that we do. Also everything in terms of our internal work and our internal policies, it's co-produced. So that's the same with our external work, is that, everything that we do is completely made with disabled people. So that's the same with our staff. So, say it might be a member of the leadership team who's putting together our policy around annual leave, for example, but we will, run that by every member of staff because we want their opinions. We want them to feed in. We want to find out, are we accidentally going to be causing any access barriers for someone by putting in place this policy? And before we do that, we may need to have a conversation to, make sure that that barrier doesn't happen. So that's a little bit of like how we operate as an organization. And I think even our co-leadership model, I think really shows that. So when Caroline, at the moment is on family leave, And so instead of recruiting for a, CEO to come and just cover that period, myself and another colleague stepped up into a co-leadership role. So we both share the responsibility of the CEO role. So we have different areas of that role that we will have responsibility for, but it's really about working collaboratively together and with our COO to really make sure that we're bringing all of our skills to the table and seeing how they can complement each other and bring different bits of expertise. And yeah, I'm really pleased with how it's going so far.
That's amazing. I love that you guys kind of look into how you can solve problems holistically and work together to, fill in the gaps if someone needs to leave for family leave or I'm sure other reasons that people may need to take off for some time. Let's see, what tools, routines, or boundaries have you found that help you manage fatigue, pain, and other issues you have to deal with working with disability?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think for me, for me, like I said, I'm an electric wheelchair user. I also have 24-hour care. And obviously the fact that I have a job at all, within transport is, there are barriers for disabled people when using all different transport options. So for me, being able to work remotely is really make or break for me in terms of a role because if I am not worried about, the commute into the office and all the barriers and all the energy that I'm going to spend on that commute, I can give that energy, time, and attention to the work that I do. And that to me is really important. So being able to work remotely is incredible for me. Before the pandemic, I was commuting about 3 days a week into London, where I lived roundabout. So it was 2 hours door to door. So I was doing a lot of time commuting, and that was because that was, the culture at the time, and it was just sort of made possible overnight. I guess like with the pandemic, even though disabled people have been saying like remote working was possible for far, far longer than we should have. It became possible and now is a really important boundary for me is that I'm not commuting in regularly, but I will go in to, various events or meetings where that's appropriate, but we're also really flexible on that. So, we're not the kind of organization that if there's a particular meeting that we wouldn't ask, hey, is there a way to join this remotely? Even though it hasn't been said. So I think that's one really important thing for me. I think in terms of other challenges that I have throughout the day, so you mentioned like chronic pain, so that's something that I also experience. So for me, if I'm having a particularly bad pain day, yeah, and this is same with like other things that people can experience, but if I say that to my colleagues, like, hey, today I'm having a really bad pain day. There's already empathy there because, like I said, we're all disabled people and we're also all very empathic people. So they already kind of get it. And that just that level of understanding, I think, makes the workplace so much better to be in. But I think also, people helping each other out and saying, hey, okay, if you're having a difficult day, like, can I take something off your plate? Or, can we reschedule this thing that we were going to be doing? And just really encouraging each other to work when and how we feel our best. And obviously, with different conditions, you're not going to feel your best a lot of the time or even most of the time. But I think being able to work flexibly and having understanding is so important in terms of boundaries, that's not something I am super good at, I will admit. So I don't want to come on here and say I've got it all figured out because I absolutely haven't. It's difficult for me to really draw firm boundaries because the work that I do at Transport for All is so incredibly important to me. And it's so important to the community. It's so important to hold, decision makers to account that it is really difficult to switch off. And to make sure that you're not overdoing it, that you're not slowly getting burnt out. So with boundaries, that's something I definitely am still working on is how I can do that work-life balance a little bit better. But yeah, I think you have to put yourself first as much as possible. You have to listen to your body when it's telling you, okay, I can't do this, or I need a break, or you know what, not today. And just being okay with that and knowing that your colleagues are going to be okay with that.
I think that's really important advice and stuff I'm working on myself as well. Kind of, especially the listening to your body part is something I struggle with because I have
Yeah.
that urge to keep going. I get hyper focused, but I have to step back and be like, my brain may be excited about this still, but my body is going to collapse if I don't take a
Yeah.
break.
And it's so difficult because like where there's like the body and mind are in conflict, like it's really difficult to put in place that boundary. And it's something that, one bit of practical advice that I got for that is by almost listing out different symptoms. And it's okay, if I have this symptom, then I'm going to have a rule that I'm going to log off if I'm experiencing this, or if I experience two or three of this list of symptoms, then that's going to be, where I draw that line. And it's almost like pre-making that decision so that when you're wanting to fight it, you can go, well, hang on, I did that for a reason, and try to, hold yourself to account.
I love that. What is a misconception you still encounter about disabled leadership and advocacy work?
That is a great question. I think that first of all, there are not enough disabled people in leadership. And I think there's not, you see that at a lot of companies. I think you see that a lot at companies, even where there's a commitment to, having more disabled people in their, on their staff or in their networks or whatever it may be. But data shows that disabled people tend to stay in lower level or entry level jobs for longer than their non-disabled counterparts. And I think that's because there's this fear amongst disabled people, or there's this feeling of that you constantly need to be grateful because some employer took a chance on you. And if you were, like me, I always share that I have a disability. When I apply for jobs, that's a completely personal choice, but it's also because it feels relevant to me and to what I can bring to the table. Not saying that that's right for everyone, but I think if particularly, when your employer becomes aware of your disability or your impairment, there is this really toxic culture of you need to work twice as hard, you need to be twice as good to be seen as equal to your non-disabled colleagues because they could have gone with and I'm using like air quotes, like they could have gone with a safer choice of, hiring someone who didn't have a disability because there's this misconception that we're going to be unreliable, that we're going to be less good at the job, that we're going to be off sick all the time, or, all these other misconceptions. And I think for disabled people, it's really difficult to shake that that feeling of inadequacy or needing to be better. And therefore, leadership opportunities don't feel as achievable. They don't feel as possible. And we see that at companies where, they may have a larger amount of disabled people than average in their entry level workforce. But where is that in leadership? That tells you about the priorities of organizations. And if they're not recognizing that, that representation isn't reflected at all levels, then there needs to be a bit of an internal culture conversation about how can we make sure that all employees, but particularly disabled people, are considered for promotion, that they're actively encouraged to go for, more responsibility and more, you know, more positions of seniority. So I think there are not enough disabled people in leadership for all of those, sort of all those internal culture reasons. And I think that also almost that internalized ableism feeling of that I'm not good enough to be a leader, I'm not good enough to be a CEO, or my impairment or my condition means that maybe my type of leadership is going to be different. And there's no reason that you can't job share a CEO role. Like right now at Transport for All, we're sharing that role amongst two people. So even people who maybe they're thinking, well, I can't work full time and don't CEOs need to be full time? It's like, well, not always. Like, the leadership roles can also be they can also have reasonable adjustments. They can also be roles where you're not, like I mentioned with that barrister, no, you don't have to be the first one in and the last one out in order to be a good CEO. And but we need more representation of that, and we need more disabled people to have that confidence that they should go for that bigger paycheck. They should go for that, higher amount of responsibility because they are good enough.
Yes, I agree. I think there's so many social rules and limits that are kind of arbitrarily placed on different roles and lifestyles and ideas that it can be really hard to break out from, okay, it's supposed to be this way and it's supposed to be
Mm,
that way and it should do this and it should be that when it doesn't actually have to be that way. If you think outside of
yeah,
the box and are able to be creative on, okay, well, let's say those rules didn't exist. How else could we make this work? And I think, that's beneficial for everybody, the disabled people that, could benefit from having expanded definitions of roles and ways to work, but also just I think the creativity that comes out of that is beneficial for everybody in expanding
yeah.
how we function as a society. So,
It's because things like
um,
that will benefit not just disabled people to be in leadership, which obviously I want more than anything, but it also just allows flexibility for maybe people of caring responsibilities or parents. And, their inclusivity really, it's never going to just benefit one group. It's going to benefit other people. And just as you were talking, I was also thinking that I can't remember how many years ago it was, but at one point, if you Googled like female CEO, the first image that came up was a Barbie. And like, because that was the first thing that, Google had in terms of like that representation and like that's changed. Now, if you, Google female CEO, you will see more and more amazing women who are CEOs in different organizations, like in every single sector. So we're getting there, but we definitely need disabled people to be brought on that journey.
yes, I agree. We're coming up to the end of our time, but I want to ask one more quick question.
Of
If you could
course,
send one message to employers who are still struggling to get accessibility, what would it be?
I would say that you are overlooking the benefits to not just your internal culture, but to whatever it is that you do in its external form. So, thinking, for example, like if you're, so you mentioned about like creativity in looking at roles, right? I'm forever saying that disabled people are the best creative problem solvers because that's kind of what we have to do every day in a society that isn't designed for us. We have to creatively figure out how we're going to navigate the world, whether that's a physical space, a digital space, or, policy, whatever it is. And so if you're bringing people who have that skill to your organization, it can only benefit the work that you're doing. By bringing in a more diverse workforce, you're bringing in more ideas, you're bringing in more people who have also had to be really calm under pressure at times and who have probably had to have difficult negotiating conversations with medical professionals or, counsel professionals, whoever it might be, really don't undersell the value and the skills that just being a disabled person gives because, we have to be on top of so many things just in order to navigate society that we can bring those skills to any workplace and it will benefit. If it will benefit the team, it will benefit the internal culture so much. And then externally, if you are a company that's working on a product, or if you're a company that, you're putting out an advert on TV or something, and you have a diverse group of people behind that project or that product or that idea, they're going to bring their own spin, their own representation to it. So what then is going to happen is if you have a disabled person who is leading, say, a product design, I think, this isn't I'm in no way connected with this company, but like looking at Rare Beauty, for example. So that's the beauty company that's owned and run by Selena Gomez, who for people who don't know, she has lupus, she has other, impairments and health conditions. And in her Rare Beauty, they recently came out with a perfume and they have designed this perfume bottle so that it's much easier for people who either have lower dexterity or lower hand strength, arm strength to be able to, squirt spray the perfume. And it's only by bringing disabled people to that product design that you're going to then create that product that's going to then be more appealing to more people because it's not only going to be sold to everyone who would have bought the Rare Beauty perfume regardless of, its design, but you're also selling it to all these people who you've now opened up this product for. So it makes such business sense to hire disabled people to benefit the internal, and then that will then go into your external facing materials, products, and then disabled people will be more likely to shop with you or, choose you as a service provider or whatever it might be because you've made us feel included. So I think that it's I realize that's quite a few messages to send, but ultimately it's don't underestimate the value that disabled people can bring.
Right. Hiring and including disabled people isn't just the right thing to do, but it's also good for everybody involved, not just the disabled people that are being included.
Exactly.
Right. Well, I love that message. Thank you so much, Emma, for coming on the show today and sharing your experiences and stories and wisdom. I hope we speak again soon, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you, and thank you
Thank
for watching this episode of How We Work Now.
thank you so much for having me.